Disabling scripts, and we're gonna start again.
Alright, give her a go.
Okay, here we go. I'm just waiting for them to crash the region again. Okay, welcome to another question and answer session. Still waiting for the region to crash? No? Fingers crossed. Alrighty then. Hopefully we'll have a short Q&A today. It won't be short if we keep having region crashes, but hopefully we can keep it short. We don't have a lot to talk about, so the length of this will somewhat depend on the volume of questions that you guys have for us. So I think I'll start out with just briefly give you an idea of what we're looking at right now for release. Originally I was aiming and hoping we could get a release out the end of this month, like just the beginning of November kind of thing, but that's not looking like it's going to happen. So now we're sort of hoping to target it early December, and if we can't get it out early December, we won't get a release out until 2013, and the reason for that is because Linden Lab has a whole bunch of what they call no change windows, which basically means we're not allowed to release on a Friday because, for example, Linden Lab will have no employees or very short-handed on employees for the Saturday and the Sunday, and if we do something wrong with our release, or 2014, if we do something wrong, basically we can hammer things and people will have to come in at Linden Lab during their holidays, and they don't like that. So there are a thing called no change windows, which are periods of time which we're not allowed to do a release. All third-party viewers are binded by this somewhat. So we can't release around Thanksgiving, the American Thanksgiving. We can't release certainly around Christmas. Things like that. So our windows for releases, because there's holidays coming up, is somewhat limited. So it was either the end of October or the beginning of, very early beginning of December. So that's our target for a release. The next thing that we had in mind is what are we going to release with? I know we've been promising that our next release would have the server-side appearance changes and updates. Improvements, or as Linden Lab called it, polishing up code. I think it was Torley who coined that term. So that code is just sort of coming visible to us now. It's taken Linden Lab quite some time to make that available, and now that we're seeing it, it's a lot of code. And so, there's a whole bunch of things actually which are only now becoming visible to us, and we have to decide whether we're going to try to cram them in for the release or not. One of those is being the server-side appearance polishing up code, which is more than just polishing up. It's a whole bloody lot of more code. Yeah, they don't have it released yet. So reality is, we're not going to get that in the next release if we're going to release it anytime in the year 2013. So that's not likely going to happen. Some of the other things that we were considering to release or to pull into our code base is SL Share, which just recently became known, I think, which is basically the ability to post to Facebook from within Second Life. Some of you, I'm sure, will love that. Some of you will not give a flying hoot. Chances are we're probably not going to get that into release because it's just not a big priority item, really. The other thing was a group ban list. So this is the ability, and this was Ed who brought this up to Linden Lab, and credit to Linden Lab for saying, you know what, that's a good idea. I think we'll work on that. Thank you, Whirly. SL Share. So what group ban code is if you have an open enrollment group, like we have with our support groups, and you have griefers coming around and coming in and just being griefers, And so what you do is you can mute their text, but if you mute their text, then they can just leave the group and rejoin because it's open enroll. Or you can eject them, to which point they can just rejoin. And so it's a real problem, right? Has been a problem for open enrollment groups since the dawn of groups. So Ed made the suggestion of creating the ability to have a ban list in groups just like you can on a region or a parcel, for example. So Linden Lab has been working on that, Baker Linden specifically, and it is a brilliant idea. We haven't seen the code yet, but we understand it is very close to complete, or at least very close to being. Nothing is ever complete, so I shouldn't use that word. Very close to going into beta, kind of ready to be tested, kind of thing. And depending on how well that works, will depend on whether or not we will get that into this upcoming release. Hopefully, it'll be stable and working and uncircumventable. There was some concerns that it could be circumvented depending on how Linden Lab is doing it, but we've not actually seen the code yet. So that's something that's sort of in the air. There's a lot of stuff right now that's in the air, last minute in the air, and by last minute I mean we're already in a release window now where we have to start really thinking about getting a release out. What were some of the other things? Interest list. Oh boy. So, you guys probably remember us saying that Linden Lab's been working on fixing that bug when you teleport somewhere and your house is there, but you just don't see it, and you have to like right-click and into nothing in order for it to appear. That bug everybody's been having. So Linden Lab's been working on fixing the interest list issues. Credit to them, thank goodness for that. So we've just started seeing that code, and there are some issues with that new code and those fixes. For example, when you teleport in now, from what I understand, really a lot of stuff doesn't appear. And right-clicking doesn't fix it, and in fact it'll never reappear for you unless you relog. So this is it's being improved. Needless to say, don't count on the interest list changes making it to our release at this point. And even if it was working, it has come to us pretty late in the game, and it turns out to be a lot of code. It touches like everything again. So we're kind of finding ourselves in the situation we were with Chewy and still are trying to struggle through with Chewy, which is that a lot of code that we have to try to merge in, and we were hoping it wouldn't be as much as it is. So chances are this next release is going to have maybe the group band stuff, maybe SL share, only because and only if it's a small amount of code and has little chance of causing nasty bugs, kind of thing. Thank you, Whirls. Whirls is amazing. She's always got these links. So that's... What am I forgetting? Am I forgetting something? Oh yeah, materials. We'll have materials out. In fact, materials is one of the reasons why I'm really hoping we can get a release out in 2013, so that people will have materials. If we start trying to merge, even if it was working, even if Linden Lab's interest list stuff was working, even if their server-side appearance fix-up code was fully tested and functioning and all good to go and ready, which it is not, we're going to be set behind, again, merging these, at least even just these two things into release. Export feature will be in release, absolutely, and ours is even more functional than that in some of the other viewers. As coincidence would have it, we were also working on export for quite a while now, in our own way. And when DAE export came out from Latif, Cinder did that work, and of porting that in, keeping our existing import-export system, and just adding DAE in with it. So Suite asks, what is export features? That is the ability to export your content to your hard drive, and then you can re-import it back into SL or OpenSIM or wherever, and vice versa. You can make something in OpenSIM and export it to your hard drive and then import it back into Second Life. The catch is that we are being very, very anal as far as permissions are concerned. So, for example, it goes without saying you have to be the creator in order to export it. But it goes more in depth to that. So, for example, let's say you make a house, and you texture that house, and you export it to your drive, and then you import it, and there are no textures on the house when you import it. It's because you didn't create the textures. Do you understand? So export will not fail to happen. It will still work, but anything you did not create will not get exported with that item. And we have to do that. We have to do that so that content creators don't rip our heads off. We have to do that so that we're not breaking any terms of service through Linen Lab. And so we've been very anal about it, and that's what you can expect. Does it export rigging on meshes? Really? I can't. I'm not sure. Really will know. No, not yet. Okay. And if you bought textures, no, it has to be you that created the textures. Otherwise, it is, in fact, breaking Linen Lab policies. And I understand that there may be some viewers that don't do a creator check on textures. So, and I understand where they're coming from, because, I mean, I'm not a content creator, but I know that if I'm a builder, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm a texturer, and making textures is a completely different thing altogether. Even if the textures are in your inventory as full perm, if you did not create them, you cannot export them. We're being very anal, even though some other viewers may not be quite as anal. We don't want to end up putting out a release, and so some smaller viewers can get away with a little bit more than we can. And by smaller, I mean user share. You know, a viewer that has maybe 1,000 users is not going to have Linen Lab bearing down on their head saying, you have to fix this right now. They might have Linen Lab pissed off at them. On the other hand, a viewer like ours with, say, 280,000 users, with, you know, the majority of the grid running on it, if we put out something that is not anally careful with checks on permissions, then that becomes a big issue, because then most of the grid is essentially copybotting other people's textures. You see what I mean? So, as far as permissions goes, you have to understand that if you didn't create the texture, in other words, if you right-click properties on the texture and you're not marked as the creator, you're not going to be able to export and import that texture. Right. So there is, just as a side, there is a way around, because there's going to be cases where texture creators will be okay with you exporting and importing their texture. They're okay with that. And this has been a topic for some time. There is a way that a content creator could give you that permission. A texture creator, for example, could give you that permission. And that's through adding metadata to the textures and to the items in Second Life. Unfortunately, though, that requires server-side support. And I can assure you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Linen Lab will never, at least not under current management, accommodate importing and exporting content out of their grid. So, although it is possible, feasibly, theoretically, it's not likely ever going to happen. Yeah, so we have to go by what the policy states, and the policy states is that basically, to paraphrase and just the bulk of it. If you did not create it, you cannot export it. Period. No exceptions. And if your viewer makes exceptions to that rule, you are in violation of the third-party viewer policy. And as it is, I'm pretty sure Linden Lab's not too happy that import-export is becoming widespread amongst third-party viewers again. So, you know, if a viewer, especially a popular viewer, starts bending those rules, it could trigger Linden Lab to make some new policy changes that could outright terminate any kind of import-exporting, or at least try to. So we have to be anal. And unfortunately, that means that your textured builds, if you didn't create the textures, will not have the textures when you bring them back in. And yes, like Worley said, and Letta and others, there are ways of working around it in which are not dependent on the viewer. I bet you somebody's going to record that and like change the words around and make it sound all bad.
Going to?
Or is in the process of. So we will have materials. We will have. I'm pulling a blank here. We'll have materials. We'll have export, import, export. We'll have. What else do we have? Lots of good stuff. So we're in the process now of stabilizing ribbon particles. That's it. That's a good point. That's pretty cool. Thank you, Linden Lab. Materials. I'm sure Worley will have a link for you. Or Inara, even. Inara has done some really good blog posts on materials.
And there'll be other cool things coming up too. Smaller things that most people won't notice.
Yeah. You're going to get a link on materials momentarily, I believe. And ribbon particles is something that Linden Lab's been working on. And I don't know if there's actually any documentation on that. Maybe Inara has documented that already too. It's not something I can easily explain in words.
Ribbon particles let you do funky things with your particle stream.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It also lets you actually mute particles. Like, you know, sometimes you go into a region and there's like some particle spam going on and it really hits your frames per second, like your performance starts to drop really bad. This actually lets you right-click on the particles and mute them, which is pretty cool. Okay, there's materials. Thank you, Whirls. Yeah, it's like being able to connect particles together. It's pretty cool if you're into that kind of thing.
And there's Pantera put out a link to the ribbon particles.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. They can, yeah. Control, Alt, Shift, equals are my best friend when it comes to particles. And again, if you guys have any questions, throw them out there like anytime, and we'll answer them as we see them.
So there was a question: what other cool little things? How many of you used the Chewy build from Linden Lab with their conversation log and what they have there? Is anybody who used that? We'll have that. It's actually quite cool. How many of you use the recent tab in the people panel that we have now to see who you've talked to during the login if you accidentally closed an IM window or something like that? The conversations log is actually going to be similar to the recent, but on steroids. It'll keep you a list of everybody that you've talked to for, I believe it's the last 30 days. So you can look back and see, oh, I talked to them then, and it gets preserved from one login to another, whereas our recent tab doesn't.
Oh, and Nalate's did a blog post on that. I didn't know that. Jenny has a question. I don't know how to answer that. Notice a nice gritty filter overlay here. Where do I configure that? I don't know where here is exactly. Or which gritty filter you mean.
Start with your win light settings, Jenny. Elise, you can change that to whatever you want. You can change that text to say whatever you want it to say.
That's just like a placeholder text, yeah.
Yeah, the same as you can change your auto response in the Second Life viewer. That's their choice. I mean, no offense, but to me that's like me deciding whether or not I'm going to wear a Firestorm tag when I'm out and about.
If I can offer another angle on it, I think the concern was, shared experience because it's openly announcing, I am on Firestorm. The shared experience policies have to do with whether people on V3 are viewing the world in the same way as people on Firestorm. And Firestorm is, or any TPV is not permitted to include features that would make the world look different. So so having an auto response that says I'm on Firestorm would not be considered any different from somebody IMing you and you immediately telling them I'm on Firestorm. So it's, in my interpretation, not against shared experience policy.
Right. The thing with the shared experience was that third-party viewer users can see tags over other avatars' heads describing what viewer they're on. The Linden viewer users don't see that. And because they don't see that, that's a violation of the shared experience. So Firestorm users have to be able to see the same things that Linden users do. Linden users have to see the same things that Firestorm users do in the same way. And as far as the auto response goes, if a Linden user IMs you, they get the same message that anybody else messages you would get.
Yeah, I was about to add that last part. The only way that would be against shared experience is if it were limited to Firestorm users.
Right, yeah.
If only we could see each other's auto responses.
Well, OTR also doesn't fall into the shared experience thing. Because it's as long as a Linden user can IM a Firestorm user and not have an interference with that communication, then it won't happen.
OTR was overrated.
And that's not to say that OTR isn't still coming.
Or something resembling it.
Or something resembling it, right. So some of you may be familiar with, or may not be familiar with, an OpenSim grid called Moses. This is a military grid, United States Department of Defense grid. And they've been working on, first of all, they're using Firestorm as their default viewer, which is pretty cool because Firestorm is the only viewer sanctioned by use by the United States Department of Defense, which is pretty cool. But of course, they're making their own sort of modifications to it. One of those is, of course, being the military. Security is pretty important to them. And so they've been working on their own version of kind of like OTR, encryption. Probably on a scale magnitude of 10 million times more secure than what we need. But anyways, they're weaponizing Firestorm. They are so when they finish this, they're going to offer that code back to us, and we may or may not use that. Depending on how, I mean, if it's probably going to be overkill. We already realize this, and it may be too much overkill for us. But so it's not to say OTR isn't still a possibility or some variation of OTR. Actually, it's interesting. The military has been using. Originally, they started in Second Life, and then Linden Lab botched the whole enterprise thing, and so they said the hell with that, and they made their own grid, and they're using it primarily for training purposes because. So, and I'm sort of speaking for them, and I probably shouldn't be, but just to give you an idea of why they're doing this. So, there are simulators out there, and by simulators I mean like an airplane simulator, like these big expensive simulators. And if they want to change the terrain, for example, everything's got to be reprogrammed, and that costs a lot of money. Whereas in a Second Life or OpenSim virtual environment, they can change the terrain instantly, done, and it doesn't cost thousands of dollars to do it. So in that way, it makes a lot of sense. But Firestorm may get some military grade encryption.
As long as they don't turn us into a weapon of mass destruction, yes, we're fine.
That could be good or bad. Other questions?
Sweet, there will be there is a video being done. So, it'll be up on the blog once it's available. See, I don't think so. Because it has to be open source for us to be able to take it.
Yes, so they're very pro open source actually. There are going to be some aspects that obviously they can't open source, but from what I understand it, from my very limited understanding of encryption systems, there has to be a key, and so depending on how that's done, they can provide us the code, but we would have to integrate it with our own kind of key or variation of it. So some parts of it will be open source, other parts will not be, and they can do that because it's their grid. Who wants to get Samina's question?
Worley just did.
It's a book.
Vita?
VitaFit, I had a vision years ago, and I believe, Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, it was right around the time when we started working on Firestorm, that I had hoped that we could find a way to, many of you may be familiar with Photoshop or other Adobe products where you can create a certain layout of your interface and save it, and then create a different layout and save it, and you can go in and just, with a click, switch layouts. I've wanted to do that with Firestorm since like day one, but it's just been, it's a lot more difficult to do than it sounds. Unfortunately, it would be so cool, wouldn't it? Because then you could set up an interface, without chat. For example, if you wanted to do combat, you'd remove the chat, or you could have chat just show up in the console down on the screen without covering your screen, and have all the other windows closed, and have a certain set of buttons out that you only use for combat, that kind of thing, and you could save that. And then you could create an interface layout with just like a layout for communicating with your friends. And depending on what you're doing on that given day, you can just click a button and poof, all your settings and preferences and layout changes to that on the go. That would be so awesome.
As was pointed out, you can sort of do it now, but it does require a relog. Just create different backup folders.
Yeah, that's true.
I have
Yeah.
3 of them that I made when I was actually testing it. I've got a basic, which is everything set to low. I've got a normal, which is the defaults, and then I've got a ultra, which is everything set to as high as it goes. And you can just go in and restore from that particular, click the set button, pick the backup folder, click the restore, and then relog. So it's a little slower, but you can do it. The downside is it does require the relog.
Unfortunately, we're stuck with the conundrum of using somebody else's viewer or code base for our own, which is to say Linden Labs code base. Most of the viewer is Linden code. And with that comes the whole infrastructure and, the backing of how the viewer works, the code of the viewer. And in order to change certain things that we'd like to change, it would actually require very significant rewrites of the viewer code. And as we've said before, the more we change, the more difficult it is for us to keep up with Linden Lab changes upstream, because we have more conflicts than when we try to merge things. So there's a lot of things we would like to do, which are theoretically possible to do, but not sensible in the long term in regards to maintenance. Now, if, for example, we started our own grid, and we didn't have to try to keep up with Linden Lab because we could do our own thing on our grid, we could change the viewer and do whatever. If we didn't have to try to merge up to somebody else's code, we could rewrite things completely and do some really amazing stuff. But most people are in Second Life, and that's where our focus is. We have quite a few people now also in OpenSim or leaving Second Life to OpenSim, so that's also a priority to keep up. And in doing so, we have to keep up with OpenSim development, and we have to keep up with Linden development, and that means that we have less time to do our own development. And any of our own development we do makes it more difficult for us to keep up with them. So it's a conundrum, and there's no real easy solution to it, or no real answer, easy answer. Yes. And that's it. Just yes. No ETAs, no, just yes. So
really.
here's the thing. Here's a problem. A lot of people want the 64-bit Linux. And what if I were to tell you that it's possible to do a 64-bit Windows build as well? What if I told you that, and I'm not saying we did, but what if I told you that, let's say hypothetically, we made a 64-bit Windows build and discovered that it really has no advantages whatsoever? No, there is no viewer. There is no Windows-based viewer that is 64-bit. It's never been done. So, hypothetically, if we did at some point managed to make a 64-bit Windows Firestorm, but discovered that actually there's really no advantage to it. In fact, it could be a disadvantage because everything has to be built differently for 64-bit versus our regular 32-bit that we run. So in a way, if, let's say it was possible that we could do a 64-bit, and I'm doing this all hypothetically, let's say it was possible that we did a 64-bit Windows and a 64-bit Linux. That's kind of like us having different viewers again. You know how we had the challenge of trying to develop Phoenix and Firestorm at the same time? Well, if you're running if we're building a 64-bit Firestorm and a 32-bit Firestorm, they're basically two different builds altogether. And their whole compiling, everything is completely different. So suddenly, we're trying to develop two different viewers and trying to keep them compatible with each other. So when we, for example, commit a change to our 32-bit version, we also have to merge in that change to our 64-bit version. I'll give you another example. LinteLab drops on us server-side appearance changes, interestless changes and stuff, and it takes us months to merge that, or we'll say weeks, to merge that into our current 32-bit Firestorm. We then also have to do that again for the 64-bit version. So we have to ask ourselves, if we did do a 64-bit, if it doesn't have like huge advantages to that, it's not really worth it. It's not really worth it to do it. And so we found that, hypothetically, we found that there was no real advantage to it. However, that's not to say it will never happen. Yeah, I mean, Linux, too, there are disadvantages to using 64-bit Linux, because a lot of stuff doesn't work. So we have to support that, too, right? You guys got to understand, we also have to support everything that we release that's official. And so then we have to support the bugs that a 64-bit Linux version has. And we would have to support the viewer with all the bugs that the 64-bit Windows version has. And there's one other thing to consider. Mac users. Where's my 64-bit build? Oh, I have Sean turned down. Is he loud again?
Was for a second. Seems to be off again.
Okay. So that's where we kind of stand with the 64-bit stuff. It would be really cool if it was like a huge improvement, but all of our viewers, I think every viewer out there now is large address aware, which allows it to use more memory, but it's not truly a 64-bit application. A lot of people don't understand the difference there. If it's a 64-bit application, it's going to land in a different folder in your program files. I'm talking Windows. I don't know Linux well enough. Certainly not Mac. But so if you're on a Windows 64-bit Windows operating system, you're going to have two program files. You're going to have one that's program files and one that's program files bracket x86 bracket. If it's a 32-bit application, you're going to find it in the... Which one does it go to? I can't remember now. Right. A 32-bit will end up in the x86. So let me say there is a third-party viewer out there who claims to be a 64-bit viewer. I'm not going to name names. And a lot of people think and believe him that it is a 64-bit. So I would say to you, if it's a 64-bit, why does it install in the 32-bit programs file folder? So yeah, there is no 64-bit Second Life viewer or even OpenSim viewer, as far as I know, in existence just yet. It's just large address aware, which allows it to use more memory, but it isn't truly 64-bit. So that's a 64-bit dilemma. Conundrum. Okay, so I'll step off my stool and support Ed, Letta. Do you guys have anything to talk about?
We've always got some awesome classes y'all should come to.
And I'm back. Did you happen to notice Zan's question, Jess? I've got it here. I'll post it. I'll repeat it.
Oh, right. Mesh deformer. So I can't say.
Can
I
you
can't
say shared experience? And we have to wait from.
Okay, yeah.
Linda
So
Lab?
okay, I'll do that approach. So first of all, the Carl mesh deformer is not allowed to go into Second Life. Period. Unless Linden Lab adds it as well. And this is again going back to the shared experience policy. Because the Linden viewer, if we put the mesh deformer, yes, but that's in-worlds. That's not Second Life. And yeah, the deformer will work on other grids that support it. And the intention, I believe, with the next release is to have mesh deformer available for OpenSim. We're not doing anything with in-worlds because they... How should I say? I just won't say. We're not doing much for in-worlds. They're doing their own thing. But the intention is to have the mesh deformer in Firestorm with the next release for use in OpenSim only. It will not be working or available in Second Life. Otherwise, we'd be banned. Banned. Terrible. So, as far as the deformer goes, Carl's deformer goes, until Linden Lab has it, nobody is allowed to have it in Second Life. However, I can probably just say there is a possibility that, perhaps a good possibility that a mesh deformer will show up at some point in the future. That may not be Carl's.
As far as the Coco stuff, that's up in the air. I don't know how bad that merge is actually going to be for us. Next release will have Coco? Cool.
Yeah, it's in there. Didn't we still have some... Weren't there still some nasties with Coco?
You're quite welcome. As far as being promised in-world mesh building when it went live, Maverick, promises are always worth less than the paper that they're written on. My nature is that I believe it when I see it, and I only believe half of what I actually see. Well, maybe not. Maybe it was just an honest mistake that when that came in that you would be able to do mesh in world, but, you know. That leads me to something I wanted to talk about a little bit. And that is the sheer complexity of Second Life itself as a system. Most people don't seem to have much of an understanding at how complex Second Life actually is. I mean, if you stop and think about it, if there's 50,000 people in the world, there's 50,000 computers, add all the region servers, then add the asset servers, the chat servers, the inventory servers, this server, that server, the other server. It's a fairly large network with a huge amount of data being spread around to start with. Quite frankly, I'm surprised Second Life works at all, let alone as well as it does. Wouldn't know, never been there. SL eats up all my time.
I've never been much of a gamer.
I'm a gamer. I play solitaire.
Yeah, I'm kind of like that. Tetris, Solitaire, Pac-Man. Oh, World's Eve is a very popular, what do they call it, massive online multiplayer.
MMORPG.
That's it.
Remember, so does SL. They just stopped telling us what class they're on. It's 5 or higher. For region hosting, at least, now.
Actually, from what I understand, all regions are 5 now. Class 5. Well, yeah, that's what they say. As far as I know, there's no way to confirm. So, are there any questions that we've missed? I think we've missed a few, but I can't be sure. Oh, Venafit had a question. I'm just scrolling up here. Is the co-work with Linden Lab a good one, a frustrating one, or non-existent? I'm presuming you mean the cooperation
All
between
of the above.
Linden Lab. Yeah, exactly all the above. We have our good moments. We have our not so good moments. But overall, I'd say things are improving. Things have improved a lot since we started, I'll say. Oh, Linux question. JZ, that best would be... Linux questions to our team would best be answered by... Z-Re is Linux, isn't she? Can't remember. TechWolf? Or Z. Okay, Z, I thought so. Z is going to hate me, but... Or Miro, that's right, Miro as well. So Z-Re, Miro Calas, who else? Although, as far as dependencies go, you really want to talk to a developer, I think. You'll get your best answer. I'd say contact Z-Re, Poke Z. I'd also say TechWolf Lapindo, but his availability is pretty minimal lately. Tech would really be able to tell you, because he's like Linux junkie.
I'd also echo Jess's thoughts. Things have gotten a lot better with cooperation with Linden Lab, and hopefully there's going to be more cooperation in the future. Materials,
But, I mean,
for example, is a good
Yeah.
example. Materials was developed both with third-party viewer developers and Linden Lab working together. So that's pretty cool.
But there's still some frustrations we have, like Linden Lab working for the most part in secret on things, and then dropping a whole crap load of code on our heads, and then being frustrated with us for not getting releases out faster. It's kind of like the chicken and egg thing. If we had more heads up, if we had more collaboration, and I mentioned this at the third-party viewer meeting we had just yesterday, and this is my opinion, but if Linden Lab and third-party viewers could work transparently and communicate with each other with things that they're doing on a daily basis, it, I think, would be a lot easier for third-party viewers to keep up with Linden Lab with their changes. So, because we would be to the minute up to date with them, because we would be working directly as if we were working in their office. You know, the communication is there. Although I don't know if their communication internally is much better. Is that bad of me to say that? But we're not there yet, and we may never get there.
Well, I can somewhat understand their position as well, but you know.
Well, there's some things.
Yeah, we have a slightly different outlook than they do. They're a business. They're here to make money. We're not. You know. Slightly different philosophies.
One of the reasons why they work in secret on some things, so let's say they're working on a new feature, and as they're doing the feature, let's say they're working transparently like we do, and we drop some code. It's not finished code, just some code. We've committed it or committed it to our repository, and people see that and they say, well, but that's stupid, because if you do this with this feature, it's going to cause that problem. Well, we may already know that. You know, what you're seeing in the repository is work in progress. And so what ends up happening for Linden Lab is, if they were to work transparently, everything that they commit will then be criticized and viewed under a magnifying glass by people who keep an eye on their work in their repository, including third-party viewers, and perhaps even especially third-party viewers, where we're going to see things and criticize, and then they spend a lot of time saying, oh, no, we know that, we're just not finished. And so when it comes to features, I totally get why they work in secret. And right, also what Worley says, there are some third-party viewers who don't abide by the gentleman's agreement, which is basically a mutual respect agreement that we won't release anything that you've made until you release it first, and vice versa. It's a mutual thing. Some of us are, abide by it and respect that. Some don't. And so what also happens is that Linden Lab will, if they're working transparently, that feature can get released before they release it. And then the viewer that released it gets all the credit for having done it. I'll give you an example. Many of you will remember the Kirsten viewer. Kirsten widely got the recognition and credit for developing Shadows in Second Life a few years ago. And Kirsten didn't do Shadows. Linden Lab did. Kirsten picked it up and released it before Linden Lab was finished testing it, before Linden Lab could release it. And if you're a developer and you spend a whole lot of your time developing something, and you're working at trying to get it out and get it really done good, and somebody else releases it before you do and gets the credit for it, that can be really that really pisses people off, understandably. So So that's another reason why Linden Lab has been driven into developing secretly. But then there are other situations, I think, that working in secret isn't merited. So, for example, not working on features. I think working on features, working in secret is understandable. But what about working on fixes for things? Should that be kept secret? What about like really big fixes, like server-side appearance fixes, suddenly being dropped with a ton of stuff in it, which will take third-party viewers quite a bit of time to pick up and merge and get stabilized and release, because we didn't know it was coming. But had they been working transparently, we'd be able to pull that in a little bit at a time, possibly, not ending up with a big dump truck load of code on our heads, but just a little bit at a time that we can manage, if you see what I mean. So in some cases, I understand and agree with their policy of working, in the background, and in some situations I disagree. That viewer was crashy for most people. He did make some improvements to shadows, which was one of the reasons it was crashy. But he largely got the credit for doing shadows, period.
And the other side of the coin is something that Oz mentioned yesterday at the third-party viewer meeting. If they do a bunch of work on something and then decide it's not working out, and then decide to back that code out, because it's just not financially feasible for Linden Lab at the time, that could also lead to more issues if it were totally transparent. It's coming on and off, so whatever you happen to be hitting, Sean, I'm not sure what key you're hitting, what mouse button or whatever, but something's toggling your mic on and off that you've been hitting.
What other questions do we have? We're running on an hour now.
I'm not seeing any that we've missed, but...
Oh, good question, Marcus. So Linden Lab has... Some of you may be familiar with how Linden Lab does their server updates every week. So what they do, there are 4 channels for server. And by server, I mean the region. So there's the main channel, which is most of the grid is on the main channel. And then there are 3 release candidate channels, RC for short. There's Magnum, Latigra, and Blue Steel. And so the way this works is that each one of those 3 RC channels will have different code on them. And they'll run that code for a week. And during that week, they will decide which one of those 3 they're going to promote to the main channel, which is most of the grid. And they'll do that based on need on certain code that's in them. Like, so for example, if they have a feature like mesh, we'll say, just using it as an example, and only Blue Steel has mesh, and Blue Steel turns out to be pretty stable, and management is pushing to get mesh out, they'll probably promote Blue Steel to the main channel come Wednesday or Tuesday. That's right, Marcus. The going from one to another does cause some problems because they're different. So Linden Lab has changed also their viewer process, and they've decided to do it similar to how they do server updates. So now they have, and Rules I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong, they've got their release viewer, and then they do, I think at minimum, 3 release candidate viewers. So they've got like 4 viewers on the go at any given time now. And so this makes it really hard for us to keep up. They've been on a mad release schedule that is just, we just can't keep up with that. And of course, it's helpful to them because they've got a lot more staff than we have. They've got dedicated developers who work, 8 or 10 hours a day or whatever it is, paid by the hour, so that they can get a lot more done than we can. Oh, thank you, Anara. Yeah, there's some links there from Whirly and Anara that explain their new viewer update system. So this is why there seems to be a lot of Linden Viewer releases now. And it doesn't make our job easier, to say the least.
Maverick, preferences, notifications subtab. They're optional. You can get the pop-up or you can see it in the menu bar, the location field on the menu bar as well.
Any other questions?
Actually, is that on notifications? I thought it was. I want to say it's on the Firestorm tab someplace. It might have been on release.
By the way, in the last Q&A, we mentioned that we were going to try to refactor our preferences to make them a little bit more commonsensical. Not going to happen, I'm afraid, this time around. So they'll probably be even worse than they are on the 4.4.2 release. Trin, they recently purchased another game distribution company, and I don't know if they're scrapping their whole plans for Steam or not. I don't know, actually. Oh, I see. So that would explain it. And about as well as it's ever going to be explained. It might have something to do, Anara, maybe with the fact that SL isn't a game. I don't know. Well, being on Steam might have made... my view on that is split. The way I saw it was that if they market Second Life to the Steam community, to a gaming community, as a game, and people come into Second Life for the first time, they will very quickly discover that it is not a very good platform for a game, and that I think most gamers would be very disappointed in the performance of Second Life as a game. And so on one side, I think it would have backfired horribly. And if they still plan on doing that, I still think it'll backfire horribly. However, if they market it as a virtual environment, a virtual world, not necessarily a game, but a virtual world where games can exist within it, then it might be successful. But yeah, if they set up, users to believe one thing that they will inevitably discover is not true, then you've immediately lost the trust of those users before they even become customers.
Oh, I found it. The simulator version options are in Move and View. Preferences, Move and View, Firestorm. Notify if the simulator version changes while changing the region, and show simulator channel and status bar. Sorry for jumping in with the other topic.
Oh, it's okay. I was done.
So if anyone was looking for that, yeah, so you can have two different ways to view information about what server channel you're on. Either you can get it as a pop-up or you can see it as part of the location info in your menu bar. Or both. Or neither. And as a shameless plug, I'll mention that I used the class note cards to find that.
Oh, classes. Good talk.
In other words, go to
Yeah,
classes.
I mentioned it briefly when you were AFK before, but yeah, we've got classes. They are free. They usually last about an hour with approximately a half-hour Q&A session afterward, although mine seem to be creeping longer and longer. I ramble a lot. And thanks, Pantera. Pantera put into chat a link to the class schedule. It changes weekly, so if you don't see any classes that fit into times you can go to now, check back in a week, and chances are they'll be different. We're on a 15-class rotation, which means that every class we hold gets repeated over and over and over and over and over again until it stops applying for one reason or another. We did retire our bake-fail class. Maybe in the future we'll have another one once we figure out the ins and outs of bake-fail on server-side appearance. But yeah, come to our classes.
Stretch, not so tiny tinies. Sorry, Samina, it's a bug. Billy Bob. That sounds easy, doesn't it? I don't expect it would be easy to do. And probably would be out of our realm of beyond our means, our capability. See ya, Anastasia. I think that would be, and I'm completely guessing, but I'm suspecting that would be somewhere, it would be OS specific probably, and somewhere in memory management or something. Yeah, see what happens.
Just remember to write it down so you remember what you changed. Yeah, Sam, didn't you know changing your group tag is magic?
They're not the same kind of magic as relogging, but they are both magic.
And by magic, we really mean we have no explanation why it works. It just does.
Well, sometimes we can explain, sort of, but it's magic in the sense that people don't expect it to work, and sometimes we recommend it and they're like, what? I don't believe you. I'm not going to do that. And then eventually, when they finally get around to doing it, it works. Of course, I'm not sure why people resist trying things that are not difficult to do. I think there's a mentality that says if it's easy to do, it can't possibly work. But in certain cases, it sure does. You want to do the easy stuff first when you're troubleshooting. You don't want to end up 4 hours later saying, I wish I'd relogged in the beginning.
Well, Sam, you're not in bad company. Oz Linden didn't think it would work either.
And then he was flabbergasted when he tried it.
Yeah, he was convinced that it shouldn't.
So maybe it works, maybe something will work, maybe it won't work, but you certainly want to try it before you go to the trouble of, reformatting your hard drive or something. Of course, I don't think you can do that without relogging, but...
I got a good question for support. How often do you get a user come in and say, I've got this problem and I've tried everything? And support says, well, can you try this? And they say, oh, I've already tried it, it won't work. And eventually, after hours of working with them, they eventually do try it and suddenly it works and you realize that they didn't actually try everything. In fact, some cases they didn't try anything.
Well, I wrote an entire blog post on the topic of the phrase "I tried everything."
Link it.
I'll try looking for it. But I'm always very slow finding my own links. But here's a tip for folks looking for help, and this actually applies not just to in our group, but in any context where you're looking for support for something. The phrase "I tried everything" means absolutely nothing, because first off, if you actually literally tried everything, then why are you asking us for help? You already tried everything. What else can we offer? So on a literal level, it makes no sense. So we know already that when you say that, it's figurative. And so we actually have to put the effort into trying to figure out what exactly it is that you did. It's something that constitutes everything in your mind. But we don't, we're not psychic as much as we wish we were. So please don't be insulted when we start asking you, did you do X? Did you do Y? Did you do Z? Because we are trying to figure out what exactly everything means to you. And sometimes that's going to mean asking right off, did you relog? Now, for some people, that's going to be a duh moment, like, of course, that's the first thing I did. But for a lot of other people, it's like, no, of course not. Why would I do that? Because, well, that's part of what everything constitutes, right? I think Jess is bringing this topic up because I very recently had somebody ask me for help with a voice issue, and she said, can you help me with this? I tried everything, and the first thing I said was, did you relog? She said, no. So she relogged, and her voice came on. By the way, when it comes to voice in particular, relogging and toggling will fix most temporary voice issues. So if it's not a matter of not all, obviously sometimes voice is just a pain in the butt. But if it's a problem that just started, it's not like it's been going on since you installed this version of the viewer, then it's very likely to, at the very least, you're not going to be wasting your time by trying. So yeah, there's my mini spiel on the phrase "I tried everything." It's one of my pet peeve phrases. Honestly, please don't use it. No, I'm kidding. Just if you use it, just don't. Just be aware that I'm not taking you literally. All right. I hope that makes sense. And I'm going to look for that link now, even though it says mostly what I just said.
I think also what often happens is, and who mentioned it earlier in here? Anyway, as support, you'll get a lot of people. It was Jay-Z. So sometimes support will say, can you please try and do this? And the user will not try that because they think that can't possibly fix it. So I'll just say, yeah, I tried, it didn't work. And so then support has to take your word for it that you actually tried that. And we'll go on to the next thing. And eventually you come to a dead end, and the issue can't be fixed. But it can be fixed if you just try what support says to try. Because even though, it doesn't make sense that might fix it, changing group tag doesn't make sense either, and it fixes things. And so just don't make the assumption that won't fix it. Just try it.
In fairness, one of the other reasons that we get that response is when people think they've tried it. but they actually haven't done exactly what we're suggesting. They're doing something
Yeah.
that they interpret as what we're suggesting. And then there are, and this in particular comes up with voice a lot, there are a lot of fixes or things you can try for voice that may or may not work the first time, but that does not mean it will not work if you keep doing it 3 or 4 more times. Toggling, like I said, I have only had maybe one voice glitch that could not be fixed by toggling over and over and over and over and over again. Enough toggles, it may work. When it comes to certain kinds of issues, there isn't a one, you push this button and your problem is solved. It's more like putting a hammer to a nail, and you just keep trying the same thing over and over, and eventually it may kick into shape. That's especially common when it comes to issues that have a strong network or connection factor, like voice issues often do, like Bakefail sometimes does. So, even if a replace outfit on a Bakefail doesn't work the first time, it does not mean that you stopped trying it. Sometimes it will, it just needs to be persistent. Hope that made sense.
I think so.
And Jay-Z makes a good point. The order does matter sometimes. The order that you do things in really does make a difference sometimes.
Yeah, the missing inventory page on our wiki is a good one to make sure you do in order. It really is ordered from the easiest stuff you could possibly try to the stuff that is most complicated.
So I think I'm going to call out last call for questions. I see Billy Bob typing. I love that name.
All I'm going to say is mutters, Jess, mutters.
Yes, that's a great point, Trouble, because so I've got a wired-in connection at home. But sometimes I'm at my dad's house or at my mom's house and I use their wireless. My dad's got a pretty good wireless connection. My mom does not. And the difference is enormous. And so all of a sudden, all these problems that I've never seen before, when I'm at my mom's house, I've never seen before on myself, but help with people all the time, all of a sudden I have them all. And, connection cannot be underestimated as a factor in your second life quality of life.
Right, and connections can cause issues that you would never even think could be connection related.
Yes, and don't mistake a fast connection for a good one. They're not the same thing. Just because you can drive 80 miles an hour doesn't mean that you can coast over the speed bumps. What would that be in kilometers? I want to be all inclusive.
80? 125.
125
kilometers an hour. Well, sorry, 130. 125 to 130 in that range.
Without my speedometer in front of me, I couldn't tell you.
120 kilometers an hour is 75 miles an hour. Give or take.
So, Blitz is typing. Blitz was typing. Blitz is typing, was typing. This whole thing of being able to see, like, in the group tag when somebody starts typing, I love that.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Love it too. By the way, if anybody doesn't know where that is located in Preferences, Chat. I'm frozen.
I didn't know we had a menu option.
No, it's Prefs Chat General at the bottom. Show typing indicator and bubbles over avatars, above avatars. avatars. And if you enable that, see what you learn when you come here. If you enable that, you'll be able to see when anybody within visual range is typing. I'm typing right now, not much of anything useful, but I'm typing so that you can enable it and take a look at how my tag has changed. That applies regardless of whether the person has a typing animation enabled or not. So, yeah. I'll put it in chat.
Trin,
I don't remember who developed that.
Trin, please don't ask us to change defaults. I'll be looking for a very high bridge to jump off.
Oh yeah, default. When it comes to defaults, everybody has a different way of using the viewer, and everybody thinks the default should be different from what it is, or from what anybody else is. So there's a reason, because remember I said earlier in this Q&A that we're not going to get around to refactoring our preferences? Well, that's because we can't decide on how to refactor the preferences. Yeah, typing bubbles is kind of like our answer to typing animations. True, Billy. Get it back. It's already there. It's been there for a long time. It's under Advanced, up at the top. Set window size. If that's what you mean, I think that's what you mean.
Doesn't actually change the resolution, just changes your window size. So. If I remember correctly.
Oh, right. Yeah, I use set window size for that. So if I want to run HD, for example, I'll go to Advanced, click Set Window Size, and this little flutter opens up. And in there is a whole list of aspect ratios. You can choose 4/3, 16 by 9, in various screen resolutions. So in the case of this laptop, 1280 by 720 is the highest I can go, because my laptop doesn't support anything higher in HD than that. So, but on my PC, I can do, for example, 1920 by 1080. Yeah, depends on the capability of your monitor, obviously. But it does offer an HD next to the name, or next to the aspect ratio. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry. I keep interrupting. I keep thinking you're done, and then I'm like, oh, and then you're like, oh. And anyway, I found the link to. I told you it would take me a long time.
Oh, thank you.
That's the link to that page.
Oh, we can't make it borderless. Again, if we could write the viewer from scratch or completely rewrite it, there's stuff that we could do. But then we wouldn't be able to keep up with, maintain with Linden Lab.
Advanced menu, window size.
Yeah, if you don't have Advanced open, I think it's Control-Alt-Shift-D, isn't it?
That will work, or Control-Alt-D. We actually have both the V1 and the V2 shortcut in here.
Yeah, that option was added for machinima makers, photographers, that kind of thing. But especially video, because if you want to record in HD, you have to have the right aspect ratio, and that's tricky to do manually.
So,
Thanks for
Jess,
coming.
I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
When's the next release going to be available?
Oh, well, we sort of touched on that already. Are you sleeping? I'm really hoping we can get a release out before 2014. Just so that we can get materials out and some of the, stuff that people have been requesting. And then we'll work on getting server-side appearance, polishing up and interest list stuff once that's working properly. So, early December, if you don't see it in the first week or two of December, then it's not going to happen in the year of 2013.
That's what we do, Billy, actually, when it's done.
Trademark.
Rose, do you have that Jira filter for that you've been chasing me around to triage? So Rose is going to post a link to our current release targets. And you guys can use that link at any time to keep track of our progress as we get closer to release. There it is. And that will give you a list of all the issues that are currently targeted for this upcoming release. Some of them are feature requests. Some of them are fixes and whatnot. But you can see there's quite a few issues there. This is what we're facing before even considering server-side appearance updates, polishing up code, interest list stuff, any of the other things. Yeah, it's still not triage. So at some point, Whirly will manage to trap me and corner me, and we'll have to do a triage. And in doing so, I'll work that list down. So there's a lot of stuff in that list that may not actually. So just because it's in the list doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to be fixed for release. It just means that some of that stuff will, and some of it we just won't be able to do. So one of my jobs, which I freaking hate, is triaging. Whirly loves it, which is where we go through all the issues, and I have to decide which ones are going to be obligated for release, and which ones I'm going to have to push to the next release, or the next release, or the next release, to the next release. And it's a really hard decision, and I hate doing it because it's like they're all bad, and I want them all to be fixed, and I don't want to release anything until they're all fixed, but I don't, we don't live in, the Wizard of Oz and La La Land, and there are certain limitations to the human capability. So, yeah.
And Worlds, what you need to do is the next time Jess starts running away, dive and grab her tail. She won't go anywhere without her tail.
So I think we're out of questions, are we? Are we out of questions? I think we're out of questions. And before I formally call this closed, going once.
I want to say something before you actually shut it down. I just want to thank all the users of Firestorm for your interest in using Firestorm and making it as popular as it is. It makes what everybody on the team does seem a lot more worthwhile, folks.
I think everyone on the team will reflect that.
And thank you for developing a great product and keeping it going.
We try. Okay, I'm going to call this finished. Thank you all for coming.
Woohoo!
And,
Party time.
We'll have another Q&A sometime. I don't even know when. When is our next Q&A? 2 weeks?
In the afternoon.
2 weeks.
That's
Not
barring
much is gonna
unforeseen
change in 2 weeks.
circumstances like we had last month, where nobody was available.
Will I be here in 2 weeks?
I
So the
hope so.
26th. Yeah, I'll be here.
It'll be in the evening, though. Evening our time, afternoon SL time.
I prefer those.
Trin, you're quite welcome. We learn a lot from these as well. And we honestly feel that it's important that we communicate with you, the users, and you have a way to communicate with us openly in a public forum. We think it makes a big difference for everybody.
Thanks, everybody. And we are out.
It's a wrap.
It's a wrap. That's the word, yeah.